Hi guys, today I had the privilege of sitting down with Nicolas Rigois, the Global Head of Capital Markets, Products and Solutions at Standard Chartered Bank. He has oversight of the private banking, retail and SME business. I've known Nick for many years now, wonderful human being, and I really enjoyed today's conversation, as I hope you do. Cheers. Nick, it's great to see you.
Morning, Paul.
Thank you so much for coming to my house.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to see you, man.
Same.
So tell me, you've just got back from this amazing trip. Tell me what you were doing.
Oh, yes. Just got back from summer holidays. Spent a bit of time in France, visited my relatives. And then with the family, we went volunteering in Morocco at a kindergarten.
Wow.
Which reminded me that I'm lucky to do what I do.
Yeah,
on a daily basis.
Tell us a little bit about that, how it came about. I'm just so curious.
My wife arranged it all.
Okay.
I think she wanted that type of opportunity for our kids. So that was great. We got to stay with a local family, excellent food, great experience, challenged some of the preconception on Morocco. It's beautiful. Nice weather.
What was your favorite couple of dishes? Because I love Moroccan food. I'm blown away by it.
The Friday couscous is...
That was your favorite?
Has to be. Tagine's beautiful too.
Tagine's beautiful. I maybe one Sunday a month, I'll attempt to do a Moroccan lamb.
Oh, wow.
But I'm not very good at it because it's never consistent. It changes each time. So look, just for the audience members, can you be kind enough just to introduce who you are and what you're doing? And then after that, if it's okay, I want to go through your brilliant career journey to date.
So I'm Nick. I work for Standard Chartered. I look after a department called CMPS, which stands for Capital Market, Product and Solutions, which really does everything market related for wealth. Wealth is Standard Chartered is a product, right? So we service three segments: the private bank, the retail bank, and SMEs.
Okay. What percentage of your time, I'm just curious, is dedicated to each of those three segments? Because I'm sure it's not evenly spread, right?
I would say it evens out.
Okay.
Different market conditions require different focus. But I would say maybe 80% of my time is spent on retail and private bank, and 20 maybe on SME.
And just how many people do you have oversight for now? Because I know it's quite a big team.
So I look after the group side of things, and I look after the Singapore team. The Singapore team is a team of maybe 60 people.
Wow.
The group's a much smaller team, around 20 people. Within the group, you've got people who look after product governance, what we call franchise building, helping the countries. Some of the countries, I would say, have less of their own resources, and so they count on the group colleagues to come and help on certain topics. And the other side of that is what we call product ownership. So it has to do with platform design and rollout. And of course, all of that needs to work well together.
Beautiful. Well, look, thanks so much. What I want to do, I want to talk about your career journey, because the interesting thing is, having been in Asia for such a long time, I know that, you, for example, you touched on and covered structured products, right?
I have.
Now, what I found is maybe 80% of the best people in Asia that cover structured products are from France. Why is that?
I think there's a bit of an educational bias.
Yeah.
I think maybe a bit of a generational thing as well.
Yes.
The way the French system works is that it's quite quantitatively based in terms of admission to the best schools and universities. So a lot of math and physics.
Okay.
And I would say that in the early 2000s, there was a lot of focus on these kind of things. So a lot of the French guys that you see today in products would have started in some form of quantitative work. In my case, it was trading,
okay,
but could have been quants, etc. And typically, I didn't study it at school, but what I studied at some, I would say, points of connection in terms of models.
Yeah.
And so I think that's generally the story.
It's interesting. It's a funny trend that I have noticed. So unpack it for us. So you grew up where in France, and what was life like growing up?
So I grew up locally near Paris.
Okay.
Beautiful town, but nothing remarkable. Very normal,
quaint
childhood,
quiet
happy
town.
childhood. Yeah.
Beautiful. What sports did you do growing up? Because I know you do windsurfing. But
Yeah.
but you didn't do windsurfing as a child, right?
Over the summer, but so I grew up windsurfing, but that's a summer thing. Otherwise, no, I played a bit of football, a bit of tennis.
Okay. I can imagine you're a good footballer. And then...
Not really.
No? Are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
You're right-handed. So after that, I know you did a master's, you did mechanical engineering, right?
So I'm an engineer. Again, the French system's a bit weird, so I'll spare you. But I majored in geostatistics.
Okay.
Which is quite, it's kind of where geology meets statistics, which happens to resemble some of the Black-Scholes Brownian equation.
Okay.
So at that time, actually all the colleagues that studied with me all ended up in finance.
All of them?
Yeah,
wow. Are you in contact with a lot of your friends from the old days?
Yeah, some.
Okay. And where did you study? Where did you go to university?
I went to university in Paris, a school called École des Mines, mining school.
Okay. Oh, wow. And then how did London come knocking on the door? Because was that your first gig working?
No, I started in Tokyo.
Okay. Oh, that was your very first role?
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, I was very lucky.
How did that come about?
There used to be that scheme where you either had to do national service or you could work for a French firm for slightly longer.
Okay.
And you would still be in the care of the state, I guess.
Yeah.
So there was a choice that was possible. I think it still exists, actually.
Okay.
And that's how I ended up.
But did they offer you that position in Japan, or is it something that you wanted to do?
So I had done an internship in Japan.
Okay.
Which was a completely random thing.
Really? So it's not like you always wanted to go there? That's what I'm curious about.
No, so I actually ended up being in Japan because a friend of mine got an internship in Japan where he actually wanted to go the day before I interviewed.
Wow.
And so I randomly made the comment in the internship interview that, actually, I'd love to go to an exotic location.
Yeah, but isn't it the reason why I want to touch upon it is for the younger audience members that are listening? We're both dads. I keep saying to my kids, look, what you do coming out of university, whether or not you stay here, study abroad, it quite often will define the rest of your life unknowingly. Like now you're married to a Japanese lady.
Yes.
Right. And so all these things kind of come about together.
That's true.
But you didn't meet her then when you worked there. You met her later, right?
No, I met her there.
Oh, really? You've been together since day one, pretty much?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
I think it's true, right? On the one hand, I guess you can be defined by coincidences.
Yes.
I would say at the other end, you also make your way.
Yeah. What is it like living in Japan? Because if I could live anywhere for a year, that's the place. Because it's just, yin and yang. It's just new and old. It's amazing.
I love Tokyo. I love Kyoto. Life in Japan's very varied. There's lots to do.
Yeah, a lot.
The sea in summer, the mountain.
Yeah.
Everything's accessible. Cultural offerings, beautiful.
I keep saying to my wife, the only thing with Japan is I don't want that magic to shine off. So if we go there too often, like last year we went twice, it's like I want it to be magical every time I go back, which it always is. So you're in Japan for what? How long? For 2 years?
A couple of years.
Okay. As a trader?
As a trader.
Okay.
JGB listed options and also a little bit of the swaption book.
Okay.
As a junior trader under someone's care.
How did you find that then? Because it's new job, new career, new location, all at once.
So I think, I was thrown in at the deep end, right? Far from home.
Yeah.
So it was not always easy, but there was a great team, great support ecosystem. Professionally, I think what that taught me is that trading was interesting and there was an introduction to financial markets for me. But as a role, it wasn't for me.
Okay, why? Just out of curiosity.
I think, maybe I wasn't the best trader, but also I think, and more fundamentally for me, it lacked the human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So it felt, and also the trading, back then we were called the arbitrage desk. So we were not counting on client flows.
Okay.
So it was a very inner or inward-looking kind of job, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't see that job. I couldn't project myself long-term
In that.
in that.
Well, it actually makes sense now you said, because then that's why in the end you gravitated towards private banking, right? Because that's, very much has a human connection. So what I always tell people is at the beginning, it's the same, when you're single and you start dating, you don't know what you want, but after a while you find out what you don't want. You know what I mean? It's a process of elimination. So after that, how did you decide you came back to Europe?
So that's an interesting image. So after that, and I think that's actually, looking back, I think that was a good thing I did and quite a radical move, right? So having concluded for myself that this wasn't what I was going to do, I approached my boss and I said, actually, I'd like to move to sales.
Okay. Had you had exposure to the sales team? Did you get an insight to what they were doing?
We sat in the same room.
Okay.
So yes, I knew people in that line of work.
Okay.
But obviously that couldn't happen for me in Japan because language then becomes a must.
Yeah.
And someone in the UK team was kind enough to take interest and take me in.
Brilliant.
I guess interested by the fact that maybe a more technical background and that lady, British lady, she saw the opportunity in engaging the clients maybe a bit differently.
Love it. Now, did you move with your then girlfriend back then? Did she come with you or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
No. So I moved on my own. We carried on, I guess, dating remotely.
Wonderful. Good. No, I always love, because I'm half Chinese, half Irish. My kids are very mixed, and I'm always curious as to one's journey, because I feel that if you are lucky enough to find the right partner, you can build a life together, right? And unfortunately, because I see maybe half of my friends now have recently gotten divorced, and it's it's quite a heavy statistic. And anyway, okay, so you're in the UK. Tell us about the sales job. What were you doing?
So I was selling. So I was covering the UK market.
Okay. Where did you live in London?
In Tower Hill.
Okay. Did you enjoy it?
It was great.
Okay.
I love London.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great city.
Yeah.
So I was covering, I would say, interest rate derivatives and a little bit of structured credit.
Okay.
Wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So it was a learning curve for me. You see things from a different angle when you're in sales.
Yeah.
So for me, I'd like to think that it's the client who taught me, right, what derivatives were really used for.
Really?
Right, beyond understanding the definition and price movements and hedging, right?
Yeah.
The real use case of why people do what they do, I think that was taught to me by the group of clients I was covering. Back then the interest rate swap market and the, I could say, lightly structured interest rate derivative community was very nice, very inclusive. People were
Well, I'm sure, knowing you know, because you're such a lovely guy, you probably would have asked questions, and they were kind enough to share as well, right?
Yeah, but I would say, competitors, clients.
Yeah.
There was a sense of community. People would meet each other at, there were a number of annual kind of opportunities to meet, like the swap ball, things like that. Okay. And people would know each other. They would compete.
Yeah.
Right. But they would look after each other as well. So that was...
Well, that's the thing. We all spill blood in the same arena, right? So you should have respect for your competitors. And,
Indeed.
We've all got our war stories, which are always interesting to hear.
Exactly.
I'm curious because, I've been in sales for 29 years now. When I look at people on their sales journey, and there's many different types of sales, I find that there's a lack of training. And I'm always curious, did you learn primarily on the job, or did you seek further education or read books? What was your journey like?
My journey was primarily learning on the job.
Okay.
And I was in a team of people who were experienced, and they didn't hesitate to share their input. And so it was tough, but actually I'm very grateful for it. I think it taught me some good basic hygiene things that I can still use today.
Good.
But I was working for SocGen, and they also had programs that put maybe a little bit more theory, right, around the way things were done. So I was lucky. I think I was well supported in my learning.
SocGen's always been considered, especially back then, I remember it being a very dynamic organization with some really interesting players. But so for you, when you were, ascending on this journey, at what point did you realize, okay, potentially I want to come back to Asia or move into private banking? Because at this point, you were not in private banking, right?
I wasn't.
Yeah.
So I didn't exactly have that thought, but what happened back then is that I would say private banks in the market I was covering started using some interest rate derivative products to invest.
Yes.
Things like back then interest rate daily, range accrual, dual accrual, etc. And so people like me started interacting with people on the buy side that were working for private banks. And it's also around that time that investment banks started to carve out teams to specifically service private bank as a segment.
Okay.
So that's how I ended up focusing more on these type of products.
Okay.
And what also became clear to me at that point in time was that I had grown up in interest rate and fixed income, but for me mostly interest rate derivatives. But actually, I longed for equity derivatives.
Really?
So I realized that was my real calling.
Yeah.
Right.
How old were you when you knew that?
I would say after a couple of years in sales.
Okay. Because it's funny how things find us, right?
No, of course.
Yeah.
So in that case, I knew and I took the steps.
Okay.
So I moved to jobs that opened to a more cross-asset coverage.
Okay.
And ended up gravitating more towards equity derivatives.
Okay.
Over time.
And then how did you end up at Barclays Investment Bank?
I think through a normal interview process.
Okay.
Met someone at a client event.
Okay.
Ended up being hired.
Tell us a little bit about that role.
So that was a cross-asset private banking dedicated kind of coverage. I looked after the UK and some parts of French-speaking Europe, places like Monaco, Geneva.
All right. Nice.
I looked after the internal private bank as part of my mandate.
Yeah.
So that was interesting because you can't handle that particular client the same way you handle every client. Was a great platform.
Why is it different? Just to explain. I think I understand why, but...
Well, because I think you've got consideration like percentage of internalization.
Yeah.
Which your client may or may not like doing.
Yeah.
So you have to handle it a little bit more carefully. You have to make sure that you still treat an internal client like a client. So that was a great experience, and that gave me a closer sense of what being on the buy side was like.
No. And then when did you come to Singapore, and how did that come about?
I came in 2006.
Okay.
Because my boss got promoted, became the head of sales for Asia. And then we had the ambition to replicate some of the success we'd had in terms of private bank coverage in Asia. So I was brought along.
So it's so interesting. And then did you fall in love with Singapore? You thought this is the place for you?
Yeah. So I was relocated here, and things are very easy here. Things work well. So I've been here almost ever since.
Yeah, brilliant. So then, and now you've been with Standard Chartered for over 14 years, is it?
I joined in 2009.
Okay. So Stand Chart, when you joined them, because I know they've evolved since then. Yep. What division did you join?
So I joined the same division.
Okay.
It was called something else.
Okay.
Was also 4 letters. I think we might have been called
there was an acronym somewhere.
CMS back then, and I joined on the structured product desk. And back then, I think initially I looked after the flow equity derivatives.
Okay.
Which was a great job. So just after the financial crisis, very high volatilities, a recovering market.
Yeah.
And I think it became clear that there was a big opportunity in that space.
Yeah. Were you based in 6 Battery Road?
I was based in 6 Battery Road.
That's where our office is now, and I still love Raffles Place. I like being close to the action.
I was recruited by someone, Eugene, who is still in the bank today, and who I still interact with on an almost daily basis.
It's brilliant. I love that. So, and then I know you went to Tokyo again after that, right?
So after that, my wife was working.
Okay.
And the organization she worked for.
Has she always been in HR, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
From
they lost their Japan head of HR.
Okay.
And they needed someone urgently, so she was asked to cover for a few months.
Okay.
So she went to Tokyo, and then it turned into a more permanent assignment.
Okay.
And because I guess it's a bit of a dream of ours to live in Tokyo.
Yeah. Did you have kids at the time?
We had young kids.
Okay. It's great then.
So, but I also wanted them to experience that culture.
Yeah, of course.
So, but then Stanchart was kind enough to send me to Tokyo. There was a job opening as head of wealth management for back then our Japan wealth business.
So the stars aligned, and you both brilliant.
It did. Small setup, very, I would say, local setup. Not everyone spoke English, for example.
Okay.
But that quickly turned into something else because the bank decided to exit Japan as a retail bank. And so that's what I ended up doing for about a year.
Okay.
Planning towards the closure, and then I would say executing the plan.
That's not never a nice part of anyone's job, right? When you're closing a function down, or
no. So your KPIs are changing, right? So it's, how much did we ram down the AUM today?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So
I'm curious, having at this point lived and worked in several countries in different types of institutions, what are the key leadership qualities that you've always admired with some of the more dynamic leaders that you've worked with?
I think so. For me, the best leaders I've worked for, right, are people who have energy, obviously.
Yeah.
But also are able to look at things dispassionately, and take rational decisions.
Yeah.
But without compromising on empathy.
No.
Right, because ultimately we're in the people's business.
You're going to laugh. I haven't posted this yet today, so I've just read a book about because when I went on holiday this summer, I took my 2 daughters to a ranch in Wyoming. We got to ride horses, and the owner of the ranch trains horses. Obviously, he's a horse whisperer, and then part of what he also does is he trains very senior executives. So I read his book, and it's all about effectively leadership and what you can, translate from learning how to train and work with horses. And you've just encapsulated everything that he says in the book, because the one thing that I've realized is I call it rational deductive logic. You have to have that. We talked about it off camera before, whether or not it's managing people or when it comes to, a dip in the markets. If you're too reactive, it's never going to work well. But the other thing I find that you said that was really interesting that most people don't think about is I think one of the key things any manager brings is energy to the job. How do you build the morale of the team when the team's down? How do you lift them up? So that's interesting.
Yeah, you have to be a cheerleader.
You have to be, right? You have to be. Without going into anything too sensitive, but having worked with an organization like Stanchart, which is, in-country group coverage, is a complex business. How do you navigate those journeys? Because a lot of people ask me, well, hey, Paul, how can I always say walk the floor, engage people to become seen, become visible, become light, build a network beyond your existing team. And a lot of people will say to me, well, how can I speak? How do I speak to Nick? He's 2 levels above me, or he's in a different department. How do you advise people go about doing that without breaking rank and file and upsetting their bosses? How would you navigate that?
I would say, Stanchart is a matrix organization, but I think every bank is complicated. For me, the department I worked for didn't have too much of that distinction.
Okay.
So it took me a while to understand this distinction, but maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. But, I did my job, but if I had a good idea, I would not keep it to myself, right? I would hope that the whole franchise can use it.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say, actually, if we're simply guided by what's good for the bank,
Yeah,
I
good
think
policy.
we shouldn't be too far from the truth.
Yeah. I think, well, the other thing that I've learned is when trying to do more in your job, I've always felt that a rising tide raises all ships. So if you have a team and you empower them and you put them forward and to do things first, it helps everyone, right? And I remember when we first spoke, we spoke on a VC, and immediately there were a few of us on the call, if you remember. And then I said, look, you want to meet for a coffee so we can get to know each other? And I think that one-to-one interaction is so important.
I agree. I agree. I think connecting with people, but also, ultimately everyone defines the boundary of their own job, right? I mean, no one stops us from having ideas. No one stops us from doing a little bit more. So for me, that's the thing I try to convey to the team, that your job's not from here to here, right?
Yeah.
If you want to do a little bit more, if you have an idea that can help the guy that's sitting behind you, it's up to you to.
So let's use without mentioning names, a real life example. So recently, last year you relocated a colleague, someone who works for you, to Dubai.
Yeah.
Is that something that he brought to you, or you brought to him, or HR? How does that even begin, that process?
Well, I guess first and foremost, we identified maybe the need to have a presence there.
Okay.
To help the country grow, because we wanted to do new things, and obviously those things were things we were doing in Hong Kong and Singapore, but the skill set didn't necessarily exist, which is normal, right?
Yeah.
Because that business didn't exist. So I thought, okay, can you carry on doing your job from Dubai and help locally, right?
Yeah.
And so presented that idea to management. They saw it the way that I did, and then from there we just make it happen.
Now I'm going to ask you a different question, and you'll probably laugh when I ask you this, and I'm guessing the answer is no, because most husbands and wives don't listen to each other fully. That's why in my marriage, that's why our marriage works. My wife doesn't listen to anything I say. But I'm curious, because if you're going for a big appraisal, or you're up potentially for a promotion, will you ever seek your wife's counsel? Will you speak to her about it, or that's the last thing that you would do?
I would say on the rare occasions.
Yes.
So I normally don't bring work back on a daily basis.
Yeah, me too.
I'm quite compartmentalized that way. But if there's a defining moment, I guess you don't necessarily know upfront whether it's defining or not. But
yeah,
if there's something big on the horizon, yes, I would.
You'll walk through it. But that's a good person to have in your corner, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think generally she's got interesting insights.
Well, the other funny thing is, it's like I always tease my wife. Because we've been together for, I should know this, Nick, I should know this, 21 years. And I haven't won an argument yet, partially because she's a lawyer by training, she's a professor. But I told her one day I'm going to win an argument, so I'm persistent. All right, so you're back in Singapore, you're doing this, and then your role evolves, and then you become head of wealth market products, right? How much of that is private banking at the time? Was it fully private banking?
No, so we've always been set up that way.
Oh, you have?
One team covers both all three segments.
Okay, so SMEs, private bank, and then the retail side.
Yes, so I think originally when the department was set up, even before my time, that was the thinking process.
Yeah.
Right, that and I think the bank was ahead of time, because I see other banks now taking these kind of steps, right?
Most universal banks have.
Let's build a team at scale with the skill set, and let every segment benefit from that skill set.
Yeah. It's a great way.
And I think it works quite well. I mean, at times people want more dedicated attention, etc. But I would say generally we make it work, and I think that the value of the approach, I think, is recognized.
Well, interestingly, a lot of banks historically that hadn't gone that way at that point, like the private bank will say, well, we're not going to do that. We're segmented. We're a private bank. But with economies of scale, and once you've reached that critical mass, it makes absolute sense, right?
I think so. I think over time, retail banks and private banks, I don't know if it's universally true, right? But I've cultivated slightly different qualities or specialties, right? So private bank, obviously, you've got a high level of advisory, innovation,
Yeah.
tailoring of products, etc. But I would say at the other end, the retail banks were faster to the game of digitalization, platforms, etc.
Yeah.
So if you could bring the best of both worlds
Together.
right, then you would win in both segments.
Yeah. Powerful. Very powerful.
I think so.
I don't know if this is a correct analogy that you would use, but I always liken it to Toyota and Lexus, because effectively it's the same engines, it's the same parts, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
And every car brand's going that way, right?
Yeah. For sure.
Trying to be cost efficient and whilst differentiating the offering.
So as a markets guy, as a banker, what are the rules and regulations on you investing your own money? Because a lot of people might not know that there are rules on what you can do and what you can't do.
Yes, indeed. So there are rules. I would say so. In my position, I can do most things, but
Okay.
I just need pre-clearance.
And does it have to be long-term investments only, or?
There are some minimum time horizons.
Okay.
So yes.
So to this day, fast forward all these years later, is equity still got a sweet spot in your heart?
For me, equity derivatives still has a sweet spot.
That's your baby, right?
Yeah, I do like it. Look, I like interest rate derivatives. It's made a comeback in the past few years because when rates were at zero, there was less focus.
Yeah.
In the past 2-3 years, it's been back in at the center of the game. I've enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose, yes, I'd focus on equity derivatives.
I'm curious because look, as a global head, you have so many different responsibilities, and as part of the management team, obviously you've got your KPIs. But when you sit down at the beginning of each year, or maybe the end of each year, planning what you're about to do, what's that process look like? Do you take out, figuratively speaking, a blank canvas, a piece of paper, and say, right, these are the key projects? Because you've got so many. I know you've overseen digitalization, the technology. You've had so many different moving components, and there are so many different countries under your remit. So what does that look like?
So I would say, obviously, the thinking around everything digital is important.
Yeah.
It's not something that, I don't have the full skill set, obviously, right? So we work with technology to deliver those actual platforms, right? And to do I would say to do the real IT implementation. So I would say the CMPS and I were more involved in terms of defining what we want and what we think we need, and trying to put together a journey that makes sense, right? So those are typically long-term projects, so they get planned in advance. I would say in the market, we're having to be a bit more reactive.
Yeah.
So whilst obviously, like everyone else in the industry, you start the year with, detailed plans of what you think you're going to do. Generally, on the 2nd of January, those plans are already challenged because that's the nature of, an evolving landscape.
Do you find it a difficult balance? Because, in business, we're all talking about 3, 4, 5 years down the line, but we all know we've got to push the needle, this month, this quarter. How do you balance the two? Because if you're too focused on short term, then the long term never really works out the way you want it to. But if you're too focused on the long term, you don't get the immediate results.
Yeah, I think it's Keynes who said that in the long term we're all dead.
Yeah.
So I think we do need to look after the short term first.
Yes.
I would say in our jobs, those two things, they are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? I think the short term, it's about harnessing market opportunities. It's about risk management as well, right? And it's about marrying both, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You can't be too conservative, but you need to be risk aware.
Yeah.
Right. The longer term, it's more around, how you build up the team, platform plays, where you think the industry is ultimately going. And that's informed by the shifts that you see short term, right? But of course, you also need to have your core convictions, right, of where you think we're going towards.
Yeah.
And I would say that ultimately informs how we invest.
And when you're sitting down with the teams, for example, the bankers, either on the private banking side or on the retail side, do you have to sit down, once a month, once a week to present ideas to them? Is it your team? How does that whole process look like?
So my team tends to do it on a BAU basis.
Okay.
And they do it well, right? And it's important that everyone gets a chance
to speak,
to practice, to build confidence, etc.
Are these like an in-house, like physical sitting down? What's the medium of it?
Yeah, so we do it multiple times a week. So they come in different format because we try to touch as many people as we can.
Yeah.
I actually personally quite enjoy pitching.
Okay.
So I would say maybe at the start of the semester.
Yeah.
I might be the one doing it.
Okay. When you're saying, for those that don't know, you're pitching to the bankers and the clients?
So generally the bankers.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've got client seminar. I'm occasionally a speaker as well.
I'm curious because, like we've placed many senior bankers over time, and I always ask them, well, who are your key guys that you currently work very closely with? So if I was a rainmaker in Standard Chartered today, I would be regularly, I would ask you to maybe have coffee or a lunch with me once a quarter. I'm just curious, do people ask you to have these conversations?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. A lot of engagement, a lot of catching up.
Yeah.
Feedback's important, right? I would say there's the feedback from the market, from how the clients are feeling generally.
Yeah.
The pain points in client portfolios, etc. So it's important that we know. There's also the pain points that the users are facing, right? We want to know what our focus should be, right? I mean, is there a process that's particularly painful that we should be focusing on? Are there elements of the way we interact with platforms that don't work?
Yeah.
How do we need to evolve those platforms? So all of that cannot be done in a vacuum, right? It needs to be informed by both client feedback and relationship manager feedback. Because those tools are used by both.
Within your world of capital markets, what are the key 2 or 3 challenges that you're seeing today in terms of how you develop the business? Because, so for example, onboarding clients for the RMs is a real challenge, the regulatory side of things. But from your part of the business, what are the key things that you're looking at now?
So I wouldn't have one answer for this because we touch clients in different ways.
Yeah.
There are elements of what we do where clients are full DIY, they self-serve. For example, our online equity platforms.
Yeah.
Right. And so there isn't a relationship manager in that equation, and there too, ease of onboarding.
That's how the game's changed now, right?
Yeah, of course. The digital journey, the integration with the bank ecosystem, all of that is key, right?
Yeah.
And I would say there's many items where you can always do better in those topics, right?
Yeah.
I would say also from a pricing standpoint, right? How can we be disruptive? How can we touch different types of clients?
Yeah.
So there's that angle of direct to client business that the bank is doing.
Yes.
And then there's the touching client through RM kind of discussion. And there it's about the platform being seamless for RMs, right? Well integrated. Sometimes those two journeys, DIY and hybrid, need to also speak to each other because, if you think about the private bank, a client may go and buy an equity on their own, but the next moment they may also call their RM, right? So I think those are the complexities that we're facing today. Yeah, across asset classes, right?
It's kind of like when you go to the supermarket and you have to do that self-checkout. I'll be honest with you, because I'm old school. It's like, if I'm going to do this, at least give me a discount on what I don't want to be doing all this. And 9 times out of 10, when you're there, you've got to ask someone to come and help you because there's a problem, right? And I think that's going to be the case for our business for a while to come.
But it's getting better all the time.
It is.
So I think having that thinking process around where do clients want to be served by someone, where does advisory really count versus what are clients willing to do on their own? That's important. And that's also not static in time. I think we know it in our real life, right? I mean, we remember a time where punching in your credit card online was, taking a leap of faith.
Yes.
But today we're all using Apple Pay. So I think the truth of today is not necessarily the truth of tomorrow. And we need to have that thinking process. We need to build for the future. Yeah. And there are bets to be made, right? Because we do not know how those habits are going to change.
I like that analogy. I've got a few questions, if I may. What 3 key messages do you have for individual investors that are really looking to manage their portfolio well?
3 key messages.
Yeah.
Okay, so some simple things. I would say, first and foremost, I think it's important not to confuse investing and trading. Those are not the same things, right?
Can you delineate the difference between that for us?
So I would say maybe that's my second point, that being clear on your time horizons and being clear on your objectives, right? I mean, if you're investing for retirement, there's limited meaning to being in and out of a stock 5 times a day.
Yeah.
Right? But of course, there's nothing wrong with trading. But I think we should all be clear in our mind as to what we're trying to achieve, and are we trading or are we investing, right? I think if you're investing, for example, if you're a fixed income investor, right, and you're confident in your ability to do credit analysis, right? If you're buy and hold, then the discipline might be to ignore your mark to market to an extent, right? It becomes an accrual accounting kind of mindset. So I think you need to line up what you want to do, the decisions that you make, and how you react to what you see, because I mean, over an investment cycle, there are going to be times of pressure.
Yeah.
Right. And in a way, you need to remind yourself why you did what you did to potentially stay in a position.
Yeah.
So those are 2 points. I think the third point, which is common sense, but I see it all the time, is I remind it myself when I invest as well. We all have an investment thesis, right? A way we see the world. And that shapes, are we bearish? Are we bullish? What do we think? What do we think on gold, for example?
Yeah.
And I would say we should not tactically go against those long-term visions, right? Because I see it many times, people who are structurally bullish gold, they end up being caught short because they were trading short-term. So, I would say stay true to your...
I'm actually talking about gold. It's funny, when I speak to people that have invested in gold and I ask them what percent, the number always comes back 3 to 5% of, it's, I don't know why, that's a funny one. And when I've only really dealt with 5 single family offices where we've helped them build their businesses, but maybe 70% of their holdings are in fixed income. Does that sound about right?
I would say there's, I'm not the authority, right, on investment advisory or portfolio construction, but I would say probably depends on your age.
Yeah.
Depends on your wealth.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in a wealth conservation, you've made your money.
Yes.
Right. It's not about growing, it's about protecting. Then fixed income would be your de facto.
Yes.
And within fixed income, you would also make specific choices.
Yeah.
If you're a young professional and you're looking to build your wealth, you'd think that you'd be a little bit more tilted towards global equities.
Yeah, more progressive. So talk about 3 key messages you have for people in their career journeys, because one of the things I'm always asked, well, we always speak to candidates and senior professionals and say, well, what have you been earmarked for? What's next? And quite often the answer is, I don't know. So what 3 key messages would you have for people, continuing their career journey?
So I would say the first thing, obvious, play to your strength, right? I mean, I see people sometimes insisting on doing something that's not obviously their strength. I would say, play to your strength.
Yeah.
I would say the second thing, especially for people or young people who are starting in their career, is I find that they're often, from my standpoint, too worried about their first deployment. So I think until you've started experiencing a job, it's hard to know whether you're going to like it or not.
Yeah.
But what matters is to put your foot through the door and then to be open-minded enough to change direction. And in my experience, people are very open to those discussions.
Yeah.
So, and I would say the third point, if there has to be a third point, is to keep the eyes on the horizon, right? The industry is transforming. There are some big trends like digitalization, etc. I think when you make career choices, you need to have a view on what those developments are going to be. Now, no one knows for sure, right? But I think you have to be informed. You have to have a view that's beyond the next 2 years in terms of what direction you want to take, that's informed by those big trends.
That's brilliant insight, because I think people are so busy focused on what's directly in front of them, they're not conscious that they need to be relevant, as you said, 2 years down the line with the horizon. I do find it fascinating when I look at people. You've probably seen this. So I've always felt in Asia, sometimes title and rank is more important than money for a lot of people. And I often say to people, look, so many executive directors, for example, are focused on getting an MD title and rushing it. And I always say, well, look, it's not if, it's when, because, you're doing fantastically well. But I always say to them, sometimes if you're too aggressive or too ambitious, you won't get it when you want it, because everyone will see that you're doing it for the wrong reasons. It's like the first time you get to that MD title, you realize, well, okay, it didn't mean as much as I thought it would, right? So I don't know if you've had those observations as well.
I think that's true. Now, I don't blame the colleagues for wanting to progress, right? I think it's normal. We've all been there. I generally agree with your observation.
Yeah.
I would say even beyond money and beyond title, right? I think for me, I would put more emphasis on long-term trajectory.
Yeah.
Because if the long-term trajectory is correct, then the money and the title, they will both come.
Yeah, for sure. What are the key biases that you see clients having when it comes to their investments?
So I've got one thing, and I have the privilege of teaching at our Wealth Academy.
Okay. What is the Wealth Academy for those that don't know?
The Wealth Academy is an initiative where we take a lot of bankers through a series of classes, right? To things like portfolio constructions, things like investment advisory.
Oh, brilliant!
Structured product, etc. To make sure that they've got the fundamental theoretical base to go and advise clients.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it for all bankers, or how? I'm just curious how it unfolds.
So I think over time the ambition is to touch many bankers.
And is it online, or you're doing it in person, or both?
We do it in person.
Okay.
We can't always travel to every location, so but as much as possible, at least for me, I like to do it in the same room.
Yeah.
And it's done very professionally by the bank. For me, my interventions maybe an hour and a half long, talking about structured product. Some of my teammates do it as well. But whenever I've got the opportunity to give that session, there's one point I always touch on, and that point's the following, right? It's in terms of client preference. I think there's an element of preference that is obvious, it exists, but it's not discussed as such. And I call it preference for probability of default versus loss given default, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you want to make an 8% per annum return, there's 100 different ways of doing that. At one end of the spectrum, right, if you think fixed income, for example, you can buy a high yield bond. Right? They will yield you 8%. It is obvious that there's a certain percentage risk of default, right? But if the bond defaults, you lose your money. There might be a recovery rate, but essentially you lose your money. So probability of default, relatively high because it's high yield. Loss given default, known, and I would say relatively well controlled, low. At the other end of the spectrum, you can buy a very safe corporate bond and leverage it 5 times. Also make 8%, right? I mean, pardon my math if they don't stack up.
Yeah.
Right? Probability of default very low because you would have chosen a higher quality asset.
Yes.
But it's never zero, right? I mean, there's always the possibility of fraud. There's the possibility of the business being impacted. I mean, we've all been reminded that extraordinary things can happen like COVID, right? So there is still a probability of default. Then the loss, if something goes wrong, is not 1 time the notional, it's 5 times the notional, right? And so those are 2 extreme preferences. And I think that doesn't get discussed enough.
Yeah, for sure.
And so for me, that's the one point that I would like better define in early client conversation, right? Do Do you want to take the risk outright? Or do you want to leverage on something less risky? I mean, ultimately, if you believe that the market's perfect, the average expected return should be the same.
Yeah.
Just very, very different distributions of return.
Yeah.
Uh,
So interesting. So running, capital markets and solutions, how have you developed and enhanced the platform? Because I know this has been something that's been ongoing for you, but maybe you could give a few milestones and some of the major projects you overlooked.
Yeah, so for me, I've always had a certain taste for IT. Used to do a bit of coding as well.
Good
So
man.
it's a part of my job that I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
How have we developed the platform? So we've done a lot of work. We've brought online FX to 6 or 7 countries. We've brought online equity to 6 or 7 countries as well. We've built the journeys. We've built the UI UX. Quite proud of what the team has achieved.
Yeah.
We've built some RM tools around structured products, around fixed income. And also there's a fundamental work around integrating all those capabilities with each other, right? I mean, I'll give you an example, but if you want to buy an equity and you want to buy Apple, you don't have US dollar in your account.
Yeah.
Right? Ideally, you don't want to take 10 steps to go and convert somewhere else, right?
Yes.
It should be there. Similarly, maybe you want to leverage your purchase on Apple.
Yeah.
If you have, a collateralized lending engine that can help you with that decision instantly,
Yeah.
and is integrated to the equity ecosystem, then that's the next level client experience. So those are the kind of things that we've tried to build. We've tried to build it logically in a way that certain services, microservices can be reused across. And we're now at the stage where I feel we've done a lot of what I would call our signature deliveries.
Yes.
We've rolled them out in at least one place.
Okay.
And now it's about connecting them, propagating them, and making them better, right? Being informed by the actual behavior of our actual clients.
What are the 3 non-negotiable behaviors that you and your team kind of live by and abide by?
3 non-negotiable behavior. For me, 1, transparency.
Love it.
Both ways. 2, I would say maybe old style, but politeness or respect.
Yeah.
Right? I think even when we go through difficult times, there's no reason for the workplace to be unpleasant. Right? That, for me, that's very
huge,
very important, right?
Yeah.
And I would say the third one is I like people to not self-censor or not censor their juniors, right? Everyone can have a good idea.
Yes.
We need to make sure those surface. So I think it's very, very, very important to be open-minded and to consider some very left field ideas and not shut them down immediately. So I would say, transparency, openness, pleasantness, if that's a word.
Yeah. Well, when I've helped you hire in the past, one of the things I loved about working with you is your inclusivity of your team members and some of the team heads that report into you. When they've hired, they've made sure that the peers of that potential new hire were involved in the process. And that's quite uncommon because they want to make sure that team's together for many, many years to come. So there's a lot of inclusivity. So I've seen that firsthand. What do you think makes you successful? I know you're humble, but what makes you successful in your current role?
Well, I think it's those 3 things.
Okay.
I try to manage in a transparent way. I try to interact with people in my team as an, I would say, adult to adult.
Yeah.
So I'm generally, would say, maybe even brutally transparent with people. But I try to do it in a way that's respectful and with a level of empathy. And I would say, I'm very privileged to have a great team, great people.
Yeah.
And I think they share the same view.
Yeah, that sentiment is very clear. In terms of how do you get the best from yourself in terms of performance in what's a very competitive environment, not just at work, but outside of work, health, physicality, mental health. What are the key things that help you perform at your optimum?
I think that's an interesting question. So, I mean, you're professional sportsman, Paul.
Not anymore.
I'm not, but sport's important for me.
Yeah.
I've always practiced some sport. I like to try new things, but I would always have something. So for me, on weekends, it's very important. I would either hit the gym or preferably actually get engaged in an actual sport activity a couple of times in the weekend. Love to do it with my daughters when possible as well. And for me, I would say that the other aspect of it is, and I would say that that's a discipline you learn in market, right? I mean, I like to start my day consistently at around, not at dawn, right? But at the office at maybe 8:15, right? Okay. Start the day, get a chance to inform myself, deal with a number of things early on.
Yeah.
And then go on with my day, right? So that a certain level of habits, I would say to me helps with.
Yeah, you have that routine.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and when you're helping, work with your team, what do you encourage them to do? So I'll give an example. In certain companies, holiday is not considered an entitlement; it's almost a privilege. And I always say to my guys, look, you should try and take holidays maybe 2 times a year. Summer towards the end of the year, you have something to look forward to, and also gives you time to recharge. But what's your approach when managing your team on these kind of things and other matters?
For me, I think flexibility is very important.
Okay.
I see it in myself. I'm generally at my best when I've just come back from holidays.
Yeah.
Better mood, more creative, more open-minded.
100%.
That's when good ideas come.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, in my experience, right, but what I see with my team as well, you're more likely to have a good idea whilst you're doing your morning jog than sitting behind your desk.
Yeah.
So, for me, I mean, as much as it's possible, and I mean, in a market environment, you obviously have constraints, etc. But I trust people in my team to not abuse the system, and therefore I'm very happy to give them the flexibility.
Beautiful. I love it. If you could go back to one moment in time in your life, be it personal, professional, what would it be? When would it be?
I don't believe in time travel. We make decisions every day, right? And then it's right or left. Sometimes we think that right is good, left is bad, but actually we don't know.
Yeah.
Right? So whilst we can think back that, I wish I had taken a left when I took a right, maybe right was still the best decision.
Yeah, it's done.
So there's plenty of things I could have done differently, but at the same time, I don't have major regrets.
Well, that's the best way to live. One great question that I always love to ask people is, what was the best quarter of your career? And I don't necessarily mean in terms of money generated for the bank or money that you earned, but it could be challenges. It could be things where you were being stretched personally, professionally. When was it for you?
That's an interesting question. I would say in terms of personal growth, that's probably the first 3 months I spent in the UK, because I discovered a completely different world.
Yeah.
I was taught a lot.
When you went to sales.
When I went to sales, was taught a lot in a hard way, but with people who did it for my benefit. So I think that was quite a defining moment for me.
Yeah.
I would also say that maybe when I started in this job and the bank was at the time going through a transformation, and we had to define a lot of things working. Obviously, you're never alone, right? But working with a team that was newly assembled, new stakeholders on the technology side, etc.
Yeah.
And but we went through it together and emerged, on the other side as, a very cohesive unit and with some friendship that will hopefully last and outlast the professional career.
What's interesting, because your takeaway is something that is quite common. It's normally in either in the infancy of your career or when you're transitioning to a new role. But what I say to a lot of people when they're under pressure and they say, "Oh, I'm struggling," but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And when you've come through this, you'll realize actually this was brilliant. But most people in that moment, so what I've tried to say to people, going back to that point, if you could relive a moment where you realize, actually, it wasn't that bad, I came through it, you would enjoy it a little bit more, because dealing with stress is not an easy one. We were talking about playing to your strengths. What are your key strengths and weaknesses?
What are my key strengths and weaknesses? I would say on the key strength, I think I'm calm.
For sure.
Right? So I think I do manage to take a level of distance when I see that in myself when the market's hot, for example.
Yeah.
That I do stay relatively calm. I think that's thanks to maybe having started in trading.
Yeah.
When early on when you're in trading, you make your first big loss.
Yeah.
You learn something.
Your Iceman from Top Gun. Do you remember that character?
It's not a very likable character.
No, but in the end he is. I don't know if you saw the second movie, but but in terms of how he reacted under pressure, he was calm under pressure. Okay.
I think I connect with people well.
Yeah.
Actually, generally I care for my people.
Yeah.
And I think they know it.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I would say those are my key attributes.
And any weaknesses that you want to work on?
Any weaknesses?
We
I
all
mean,
have some.
I think one can always be more systematic. That applies to me. I mean, I think sometimes when I'm less interested in a topic, I pay less attention as well.
Yeah.
But I'm working on it.
Not uncommon. When you're doing so well in your career and you're at the height of your game, I find that a lot of people can slip and take it for granted. How do you continue to optimize your career? What do you do to evolve? Because that's something that I think I'm cognizant that if you don't evolve, you plateau, and that's not good.
So I don't necessarily have a super proactive thinking process in that sense. So for me, the way I see it is, if I see an opportunity for the bank, I will work on it,
mm-hmm.
And I will trust they will be recognized. And even if it's slightly outside of my remit, I mean, if it's obviously someone else's remit, I won't go there, right? But
yeah.
If it's something that's undefined, right, then I even if it's slightly outside, I would not hesitate to get involved. I would not hesitate to bring an idea to my boss. Now, maybe 9 times out of 10 be shut down, right? Which is normal.
Yeah.
And so that's how I try to add value, and I trust that it will be recognized.
Yes.
And I have to say that my experience so far is that it is. Now, there may not be a instant feedback loop.
Yeah.
Right? But if you trust that there's a longer term feedback loop, then...
You know what I find interesting, because in all the years that I've been interviewing people, I find by and large, when most people are interviewing, they ask about what's the person doing. And I always ask, well, have there been projects that you've worked on? Let's just pretend you were part of a project to acquire another organization, and after a year, you guys lost the bid. So typically, that you won't put that on the resume, but what you were involved with and for that whole year was hugely important, in terms of the due diligence, the whole M&A process, and for example, like bringing in ideas. So, you'll be measured a lot on that one thing, but what are the other things that you look to do? Oh, I designed an app, I brought it to proof of concept, and at the end it didn't happen. How long did you spend? A year. Well, that's a big part of, who you are. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. They only talk about their victories, which is the top of the iceberg, but what's underneath the iceberg is equally important.
That's true. To paraphrase a famous quote, right? Ask not what the firm can do for you.
Yeah.
Ask what you can do for the firm, right?
That's right, for sure. Any big projects that you're working on now, professionally, personally?
Yes, I mean, professionally, the team and I, we've got quite a lot of big things we're doing.
Anything that you can share that's non-sensitive?
So I would say one of them is that we're about to launch 2 big things. One is online equity for the private bank.
Beautiful.
The second one is a online structured product platform, I want to say, maybe a little bit beyond just structured product platform in our Hong Kong retail.
Nice.
I think those are quite defining. I mean, it's the start of a long journey, But I think it'll be very satisfying for me and for the guys when we roll it out.
Beautiful. Well, I love Hong Kong. I see the business is coming back a little bit there, and long may that continue. Just to wrap up, is there anything about Nick Rigois that no one knows, or most people don't know? I'm just curious.
I don't really think so.
Well, I was surprised when you told me you're into windsurfing, because it's in Singapore it's quite unusual, and you actually find that there are places that you can windsurf here, right?
Oh, they are.
Where'd you go?
So, like everyone else, depending on the season, you either go to East Coast Park or you go to Changi Beach.
Okay.
I've recently fell a little bit out of love with windsurfing, and I've transitioned to wing foiling.
What's that?
Which is it's a younger cousin.
Okay.
Where the equipment's just a little bit more compact. So the sport is evolving, and it's been evolving a lot in.
Well, how is it? That's not the one with the motorized engine, is it?
No.
Okay.
It's the one on the foil, but with a sail.
Wow.
So that's what I've been doing for the past 3-4 years. I would say more actively than windsurfing.
Yeah.
For me, it's the same. It's the same family.
I think it's so important, because it's funny. My wife, she'll be upset that I shared this, but she said to me, "What happens when the kids leave the nest? She doesn't have many passions." And then I looked at her like, what are you talking about? Because for me, I want to do everything. I want to try everything. But during COVID, what I found, we all went down different rabbit holes, but whether or not it was cooking or you did a bit more exercise. And I love that about you, that you mix it up a bit. Because I think exercise at its best is outside.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Though my daughter is a keen climber.
Okay.
And I've taken up bouldering with her.
No way.
Which is an indoor sport. That's a great sport.
Are you afraid of heights? I'm terrified of heights.
I'm not afraid of height. Neither am I a very good climber. But I think it's the process of progressing.
Yeah.
Right? It's the fact that, you can't be defined by who you see at the gym, because there are people who are incredibly good, right?
Yeah.
But it's being that 10% better every time you go that I find very satisfying.
Yeah, 10%. I'm lucky if I'm 0.5% better when I do most things. But
that's because you're already at that level.
Not anymore. I could barely touch my toes. Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Have a chat about?
No, I think I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to have the conversation with you, Paul.
I appreciate you sharing your journey.
I think it helps bring, method to the madness.
Yeah.
So I think I reflect on the back of the conversation, and yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
I learned a lot. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.